Hey there, folks. This is Branden with All Aboard Gamer, and today I have a very special treat for all of you. Lexi and I love to do interviews. We love to have folks on the channel, and I've been trying to get this current guest, who you can see on screen here. I've been trying to reach out to him over probably the last year, trying to figure out how we can do an interview, and Facebook was the key. And it is none other than Stan Kordonskiy, and we're very, very glad to have him on the channel. And before we get started with this interview and Stan introduces himself, I just wanted to mention, of course, we do have merch available. The link is in the description below. We also have a Discord that you can join, and there's been a lot of nice discussion over there. In fact, we've discussed Stan's games several times because his games have shown up on our top 100s and other top 10 lists, especially this one, Rurik, Dawn of Kiev or Kiev. And so if you can just take a look at that, like, subscribe, all that fun business stuff, we do appreciate you just viewing it here. So all of that out of the way, Stan, welcome.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So it just funny. I was just telling you off air the story of how we finally got in touch. I was talking with Francis LaBarbera from Board Game Nexus and Ant Lab Games on Facebook, and we're trying to do some work for the Nexus. And so if you're watching this video, you may be seeing it on the Nexus, and that's great. But it never dawned on me to go find your Facebook page and try to contact you that way. And that's exactly what happened. And you responded very fast. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Happy, like I said, I'm always happy to do this. Yeah, I'm kind of, I guess Facebook is the old-fashioned way now.
It is.
It used to be hot. Now it's kind of like for older folks.
Everything goes in cycles, doesn't it? Everything just sort of comes back around.
I do have a web page. It's Half a Kingdom Games. .com. So I do have an actual business web page, but it's Half a Kingdom Games. It's not Stan Kordonskiy. So that's that would be another way. But yeah, there's I just keep it simple. Just Facebook and a good old fashioned website.
That's awesome. So wait a minute. This is not one of the questions, but I have to ask, why half a kingdom? Why not a whole kingdom? What's going on with this half a kingdom?
Right. No, it's because when I was trying to name my company when I was starting out, and I thought of it, it's a common theme in like the fairy tales, like Eastern European fairy tales, that someone will get half a kingdom as a reward for doing something like major. So in the fairy tale, it'll be like the king says, I'll give half a kingdom to whoever slays the dragon or whoever rescues my daughter or whatever. And so at the same time, it signified to me that my life was kind of being split in half, where, I had my kind of like previous life, and now I would have like my other half, of my kingdom, which is going to be the board game stuff. Yeah. And so like it had like a double meaning, and also like there's no companies named that, so that helps when you name a company. Do a search. You don't want to name yourself Renegade Games or Fantasy Flight or something, although those are cool. Those are cool names. But so it was like a perfect storm, and I just kind of picked that and I just ran with it. And then it's like after all these years I had it just seems very natural to me now, but I do get that question a lot.
Yeah, and it's funny because we can segue. That's a great segue into the first question here, because I was on your website and learning more about you. I mean, I've read it before, but just to refresh in preparation for this interview. And that was the one question that I didn't see answered, is where the name of the company came from. But then the information that is there, your about page is great. I mean, it really does trace a lot of your past history. I mean, it's brief, but it's very complete in a lot of ways. And it obviously sounds like your history with game design goes all the way back to your home country of Crimea when you were young. So given that, did your passion to design games kind of evolve from a desire, because you do mention that the country of Crimea wasn't really developed in terms of board games, and you were just getting kind of the monopolies and all of that. Right. So did your passion evolve from a desire to just see better games that you wanted to play, or was it just for fun, or just part of your creative outlet, or was it a combination of all that?
No, yeah, I think the answer to this would be a little bit of all of those things. So first of all, we were sort of primed to just kind of make our own fun. Like when I was growing up, we didn't really have access to things like video games and, like tons and tons of toys. So we're like, oh, I remember my grandfather made me like a toy gun from like plywood, and I love that thing, right? He just I was like, I want to play, I want to play guns. And instead of going to the store, he made me one in his garage or whatever. And so it was kind of like, as kids, we're like, oh, I want to play a game. Let's make a bow and arrow, so we'll like get a branch and put like a twine on it and shoot sticks. By the way, kids, do not do that. Somebody's gonna end up with an eye missing. But somehow, I made it through. So we were doing stuff like that all the time. So as we got older, and we're like, oh, I want to play a board. Like it was just natural to just make our own fun. But I think that the other part is really important. It's that desire for self-expression. Mm-hmm. And I think as a lot of people have that desire, and I had it too. And I know when I was I had like attempted creative writing as a child. I don't have those books anymore, but I would write these stories, and they were just hilariously bad. Like if you read them, they're just like just stream of consciousness, like a kid would write, that to me seemed like it was like a detective story. Yeah. But it was just like, but I think that just shows that there were these seeds there where I wanted to express myself and be creative. I've attended like an art school for a period of time. Because my my family wanted to like foster that, and so I never really became a great artist, like as far as drawing or painting or anything like that. I'm extremely like below average kind of guy. I can't create anything like good, but it was all just tied into it. And I think the first time I found out I was any good at creativity was with board game design. Yeah. And it wouldn't be my necessarily first thing. Like, I mean, I love films, I love books, I'd love to be a writer, I'd love to be a movie director, I'd love to be an artist who paints amazing things. But that's not what my strength was. Right. And then so I was trying all these things. Like I tried writing, I wasn't very good at it. I tried painting, I wasn't very good at it. And then eventually I tried board game design, and it turned out there was like value to it. And then people liked it. So I just ran with it, and I found an outlet for a lot of things. Inside board game design, like you have to create like some basic art. You have to like do like, it's like making crafts. You making these prototypes. You writing things, right? And so it all kind of coalesced. And then I think that path is just kind of little seeds. It wasn't like one big thing where I knew like I'm gonna be a board game designer one day. But I think it's like this role where no matter what I did in my life, I always kind of want to be creative. Yeah. I think it led to this moment.
Wow. You actually sound like you had a similar experience in school that I have. I'm almost 45 years old. So I was born in 77. Mm-hmm. So I grew up kind of at the very beginning of that board or the video game kind of thing, with Atari and ColecoVision and all of that. I do remember that, but I also grew up in a home where that was very limited. I remember growing up for the first several years of my life, we didn't even have a TV in the house. And very similarly, we had to create our own fun. And I'm telling you, that was probably the best thing for us as kids than anything else. Honestly, I think when video games kind of came along and I got older, and I think that kind of killed that because we just weren't forced to provide to make our own entertainment. But I remember in school, we had a creative writing thing every week in 6th, 7th grade. And I think it was 6th grade that I remember the most. My son is actually that age. He's graduating from 6th grade here this week. But I remember that creative writing class. And I'm not even sure if a lot of schools do that anymore. But I remember coming up with stories, and then we'd have to read them in front of the class. And mine were always about some kind of force or monster that was kind of creeping around and things. And my fellow students would kind of look at me like, what? But I kind of had a similar experience, but it's an interesting thing to hear that you're that far away, me growing up in the United States, you growing up in Crimea, and yet having the same human experience. Isn't that great? Isn't that neat how that creativity it just transcends, it transcends spaces and borders.
Yeah, that's what they say. We say we're not that different, deep down we might have like superficial differences, but deep down people have often similar life experiences, even far apart,
Yeah. So that's great to hear that, because it sounds like we've had some similar experiences. So we were talking off air just before we started filming that your games, and I think you are one of those unique designers where your games, the themes of your games seem to just be so vastly different one game to the next. Now I'm only showing a couple of them here, but I remember your first game, Dice Hospital. Ironically, Dice Theme Park we backed because I didn't really know much about Dice Hospital when we got into the hobby a few years ago, but we did back Dice Theme Park. Now I don't think you designed that one, but kind of in that same theme or that same vein. But you have a hospital theme with Dice Hospital. You have the Shadows of Valeria, and you've got that kind of fantasy theme over there, which is out of print. And I'm trying to get it, but it's out of print. I think it's coming back in October.
Yeah, it's coming back soon. I think they're already committed to printing it.
I want to try that one. I really do. And then you have Rurik, which is just this great area control game with this beautiful action selection mechanism that is just phenomenal. And then you have Lockup, which is that fantasy, the role player theme. Your games encompass a wide array of mechanisms and themes. And so there has to be some core philosophy, though, that you're operating from. Or is this just a symptom of your desire to constantly change and push that? Like, is that your core philosophy that you adhere to, depending on the project, all of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like my philosophy changed a little bit because I actually remember after Dice Hospital, there was an interest for Dice Hospital and interest for Lockup kind of at the same time. And I was sort of designing them back to back, more or less. I definitely designed Dice Hospital first, and then the Lockup was followed that. And I remember distinctly thinking like, okay, so I made this dice game. If I make another dice game, I'm just going to be like, oh, this is the guy who makes dice games, which I don't know why I thought that. First of all, nobody cares, right? Like, but like in my mind, it mattered. And I was like, it's going to be a diceless game. And I just decided straight away that my next game was going to be a diceless game no matter what, because I was afraid that I was going to get pigeonholed in my second game. It just seems so silly to me now, but that was kind of one of my drivers. But then after that, I kind of started thinking of it in terms of like a bigger picture. And I thought, well, how do I continue to be successful? Like I got Dice Hospital signed, I got Lockup signed. So that felt great. But I'm like, how do you continue to get games signed? How do you continue? And I thought, well, it's kind of obvious. Don't be like everybody else. Don't make games that everybody else does. Then you don't have to compete with everybody else. I mean, you still have to compete, but at least you have a unique-ish product. And so that was kind of a thing. I was like, okay, if it's very similar to something that's already there, then you're going up against that, and it has to be much better. And that's a very difficult thing to do and arbitrary, and you're sort of setting yourself up for a hard road. But if you make something unique, you could say like, okay, love it or hate it, it's kind of one of a kind thing. And so I try to find some sort of a thing to put in my games that people couldn't quite say, oh, it's just like, X. So you could have this or you could have X. So pick your poison. And it has to do with theme and mechanics. So I try to like kind of pick the themes and mechanics. But then also, I read this book a long time ago, and I don't remember exactly what it was called, but it was about how people like things are unique, yet familiar at the same time. So it's kind of like a contradiction in human nature. It's like, we don't want the same old same, but we don't want something that's completely out of the left field. Right. And so that's what I strive to do. Like, if you look at Lockup, it's fantasy, but they are in jail and they're, okay, that's where, or Rurik, well, it's a Euro area control game about medieval times, but it's in Eastern Europe, not Western Europe or Asia. Right. And it's got this mechanism that's kind of like worker placements, kind of like auctioning, kind of like programming. None of it is like mind blowing. There is no like, Rubik's Cube that you have to, manipulate to take an action. But at the same time, it's like, okay, I recognize all the individual parts, and it doesn't sound scary and off-putting, but it sounds interesting. And that's kind of how I try to assess my designs.
Yeah, and I got to be honest with you, I love this game. It's one of my favorite games.
Awesome.
Of all time. And what I love about it, there was a time when I didn't even really want to deal with area control because I grew up in the Risk era with older brothers and stuff like that. And area control is kind of what we always saw. And I never thought that it evolved past that. I have been so wrong about that. Area control, area influence, area majority has been such a thing. And so when I got this, I'd already played some modern area control games and I was loving them. But I'm like, it feels familiar. And it's funny that you said that. And I'm so glad it's not a Rubik's Cube thing. You know, there's other companies that are putting out Rubik's Cube type games that just blow the mind. And I do enjoy those. I do like the really hard, crunchy Euros. I do. But what I love about this one is it gives me that thinky puzzle because of that board, that action selection board. And just like you said, it is a little bit of auction, a little bit of programming, a little bit of worker placement, and the tracks and things that you're moving up, which I love all of those things individually. But the way you've put it together is so, and I mean this as a criticism, it's simple, okay? Yeah. But it's unique and it does something different with area control, because if you just put the board there and put the dudes on the map and kind of did your thing and you're just trying to tackle territory, okay, it's enjoyable. It feels like another area control game. But what you did with being able to do something out on that board with those people on the map based on what you are moving through, and the player interaction is just off the chart. And so, yeah, I just wanted to comment on that's exactly what I felt. It was unique, but familiar. And so I will say that is an absolute success. So whatever you learned from that book, you did it exactly right.
Right.
And the lockup is funny. I mean, it's so funny. We played this with my son and he's like, so wait, we're all in prison. I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, we're monsters. And I was like, yep. And I was like, that's what's so great. And there's other monsters that are enforcing and catching us and being suspicious. And so it's like monster versus monster. I was like, that's so different. It's so against the trope. And with Breakout, you know, you're actually trying to go through the tunnels underground and get out. You know, it's so good from a theme perspective. But like you said, just the difference of mechanics, it's just so very nice. So I know I'm gushing a little bit. I apologize. I'm trying to remain objective, but, you know, I'm also a fan of this. Part of the reason I wanted to interview you, just to let you know that, you know, it's so appreciated, your design and what you do. Great. So speaking then of game design, very simple question. What's your favorite aspect then of game design? Since you've been able to design so many different things, do you have a favorite aspect? And if you do, why?
Well, you know, like the creative flow and the creative outlet that it gives me is my favorite. You know, it's like you sit down to create something new, you got all these ideas, and you know, and that feels great. I think it's like familiar to any human being, you know, whatever your outlet is. And there's a reason people want to design games, I think, who play games. It just feels nice to tinker. And I enjoy that. I think that's a very, very sort of a expected and common answer, but it's true. The beginning is the best part, right? Oh. The beginning is when you have all your initial ideas, you're getting them out there and you're thinking, holy moly, this is going to work. And then, you know, the actual work starts, you have problems to fix and the bugs and all this problem solving stuff comes later. But that initial rush where you just like have this explosion of ideas, you put them all down, you slap together your very first prototype and it kind of works. And you're like, I can't believe it already works. I've only had like this idea for, 30 minutes. And that's the thing that I like the most. What makes me want to start new projects, because I know I'll get that, out of it. But it's very important then to persevere. Otherwise, what you will end up is 20 beginnings for a board game and no endings. And so the reason I was able to make these games is because I stuck with it through then the crappy parts. And I learned to like the crappy parts eventually. The parts where it's just like something just doesn't work and you tried and tried and tried and you're just beating your head against the wall. But this problem solving thing, if you look at it like a puzzle instead of like an obstacle, you can sort of reframe your thinking. You can learn to enjoy it. And so I think I've enjoyed it a lot more over the years, to the point where now I've started doing like more development for other people. And it's precisely what I'm looking for. I want him to bring me something broken so I can fix it. Where before it would just sound like, why would I do that? Why would I work on someone else's broken game where I have all these wonderful ideas. But there is an interesting switch that happened when I'm like, I can solve this problem. Like, and when it's tough or when it's not obvious, that's almost better. Because if it's something I've already seen, it's like, oh yeah, I've seen this problem. You just do this, you know. And they're like, oh, okay, you know. But it's more interesting almost when it's like, no, it's not an obvious solution. There's all these components that have to work in a place. And so, you know, this is a long answer to a short question, but I think the creative part of it, the initial part of it is my favorite, the coming up with the idea.
Yeah.
And then solving the problems as like puzzles that you have to overcome, and then like celebrating, oh, I solved this problem, this part that sucked is fun now. That would be like the next favorite.
Right. And I think you're right. I mean, what was it? Thomas Edison, I think, was famous for saying, you know, after he failed to create when he finally came up with, I think, the carbon filament for the light bulb, he was questioned about all the failures. He must have had something around 10,000 or something like that, some crazy number of failures. And I think he was credited with saying, you know, I didn't fail 10,000 times. He said, I just figured out 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb.
Sure.
And I think that's exactly what the switch of looking at it as an obstacle that you have come up against that you need to hurdle over to keep moving forward, rather than, well, this is, and look, I think that's the difference between someone who's published and has their designs out there and someone who doesn't, is the ability to persevere and stick with it. So it's a good lesson for everybody in life. I think that's great. So I think you might have already answered this one kind of in a way, but just to focus it a little bit more, maybe get a little bit more from your brain. What inspires you then? So you talked about coming up with the creative ideas and having those sparks. Where does that inspiration come from for a particular game? And because of the difference in the themes, it's like your brain must be going in a lot of different directions. Right. But like, is it pure imagination? Is it real world events, some other trigger, or combination of all that?
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of times it's the things that I read or watch that spark it. Like with Rurik specifically, I read this book. It's called Vladimir the Russian Viking. So it's kind of a catchy title, and it was like a small paperback book. So I picked it up and I read it, like the story of Vladimir and then what happened like after his death. And I couldn't believe it, like that I didn't know it. Like I grew up in Crimea, like they taught us, you know, history of Kiev and Rus and history of Ukraine and Soviet Union. It was just something that we consumed so much of through film and textbooks. And yet I've never heard that one story. And I'm like, this story is as good as War of the Roses. It's as good as the Romance of Five Kingdoms. It's as good as any story that's known in the West. Yeah. That's like this exciting dynastic battle for the throne. And yet it's unknown, untouched. I'm like, I must have a game about it. And that happens to me frequently. Sometimes I will read something and I'll be like, wow, this would make an amazing game. I also listen to a lot of podcasts. There is one called Extra History that I often, and it's like just bite-sized history stuff. Mm-hmm. But it would just spark my interest in a topic. And then the reverse is true when like I'm presented with a theme, like someone would say like, okay, so this happened with Always Impresario, when it was a game about, it was a very generic kind of medieval theme. And then TMG requested that it would be about a Wild West, because they had a game about Wild West theme already and kind of the art assets and everything. And I was like, okay. And I ended up watching Ken Burns's 6-hour documentary or whatever on Netflix about the westward expansion. And it was, I wasn't, intending, but it was such a good documentary. I just kept watching it, and I watched it over like a period of a week or whatever. And then they had all these ideas about how to retheme the game. And so often my first stop was like a library, where like, I was working a game with a Roman theme. So I picked up a bunch of books about, Emperor Constantine. And just by reading a book, I would find out all these things, all these facts. And I'm like, oh, this could be in the game. Oh, this is interesting. Well, I didn't know that their hippodrome had 100,000 seats. That seems like a lot, and I was like, okay, so how can these things, and then it just gets me going. So yeah, it's information from the outside world. I take it in, and then it gets me excited to have it in the game, right? Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not so obvious. Some themes are more obtuse or obscure than others.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that it all comes from the real world somehow. Even for fantasy, like I looked at like the history of like dungeons and what were the dungeons, and I found out that they're not what people imagine
Nope.
them to be. You know, so
Very,
actually,
very
lack
different.
of dungeon. Spoiler alert! It's more based on like modern day,
Yeah.
you know, incarceration in prison, because they really didn't have exercise yards and
No,
commissaries in medieval times,
no,
right?
they did not.
So you know, it's a weird mix of things. It's like what fits the mechanics, what fits the theme, but it always can be traced to something real in the real world, because like you know, they say truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
And I really believe that. And I think all good fiction is based on some type of
truth.
real events. Yeah.
It's like comedy. Comedy is the same way. Comedy is only comedy because it's based in some kind of truth.
Right,
Or some kind of reality, and that's what makes it funny.
Right.
So there you go, kids. If you're watching this, reading books, reading. Libraries still have a function. You know, the internet's great, but sometimes a library is a place that you can go. If you got a community library, it's a place you can find things and just sit in a quiet place and read it, not be distracted by anything else on your computer. So very good lessons there too, I think. So very old school approach, but I think the old school ways sometimes in some cases are definitely better. Yeah. That's really great. You know, it's funny because when I saw Old West Impresario, at first I thought I'd played it until I realized that exactly right. It was Pioneer Days from TMG that I had played and we actually demoed that game quite a bit. So I never played Old West Impresario yet, and TMG has since unfortunately gone down, and so I'm not sure how I might have to find a used copy of Old West because I haven't played that one. It was Pioneer Days, so it's kind of funny you said it because they look very similar with the art assets and that Western theme. So I was mistaken. It was Pioneer Days that I played, which is not your design. So I really do want to try Old West Impresario someday. So that's great. So now I want to pivot just the last couple of questions. This question here, let's talk about Resurgence. Resurgence is your most recent game. You dove headlong just as part of how Stan does things from what we're hearing. You dove into this world of the post-apocalyptic, which is not a theme that is very uncommon in our industry. We're seeing a lot more post-apocalyptic games. You know, you see Wasteland Express Delivery Service, you see the Mad Max type of games, you see just all these different kinds of games coming out on 51st State, things like that. So you dove headlong into that. Now, this is a theme that I'm just speaking personally. Of course, I've not found of particular interest until now. You've done something again, and we're backing it, just so you know. Mm-hmm. So most games in this genre lean into that kind of Mad Max Borderlands trope. Right. But Resurgence is a Euro game. Resurgence is not kind of the dice chucker and minis and everything all over the place. It's this hidden worker placement. You know, there's a screen I noticed where you're planning your actions kind of secretly from the other players. It looks like it has a much more different feel. Yes. So how do you as a designer make a post-apocalyptic theme come alive in something that is in a Euro style package?
Yeah, this is so the answer to that would be, so you're right. These tropes are very heavy, but only in board game world. Like outside of board game world, there exist several genres of post-apocalyptic storytelling. Mm-hmm. There's like The Road, right? There's just about like survival of a man and his son in this really bleak environment. And there's all these other stories very similar to this that are more of like, or like Station 11 is actually a good example, which is a show on HBO that's based on the book. Where it's really this idea that if we had a big catastrophic event, the humans would immediately just all attack each other at the same time and all like pierce their nipples with giant bars of iron, and you know, and everything is going to be a desert. It's only one possibility, right? In this multiverse, that's only one path that could happen. We could also be flooded. Thank you, Waterworld. We could also just be like in a really bleak environment. Like The Road is literally hard to read. It's so bleak. Yeah. It like makes you want to claw your eyes out, but it's a great work of literature. Yeah. But there's also like in the middle, like maybe the nature will find a way. Maybe the planet actually will be healthier, right? So you have like a game like Paris New Eden that kind of touches on that.
Yeah.
So there's many ways to look at it. It's just we happen to be sort of in the board game industry. They took this like hard path down Mad Max route. But there is Paris New Eden, which is slightly different. There's also Outlive, which does have elements of like confrontation, but it's more about resource management and base building.
I want to
So
try
there
that.
has been, yeah, there have been attempts at this, and that's exactly why I chose this way, because I'm like, no, it's like I think that people will want to rebuild. I think they would want to band together and rebuild their lives to the best of their ability, not necessarily just start this giant war. And even the mutants, I thought, well, why are the mutants always the enemy? What is a mutant? A mutant is someone affected by radiation, affected by disease, but they also find a way. Now they're like kind of thriving in that environment. They're just sort of denizens of the world. They don't have to be aggressive. They don't have to be evil, right? They just exist. And so that was the idea, you know, and I thought that the game, there was a game called Metro 2033, which was the first person shooter, but it was very interesting because in the game bullets were also currency. And so if you went and you try to shoot everything that moved, you were broke all the time. But you needed to buy things like mask filters and upgrades and all these things. And so it was a very interesting thing that stuck with me, that it was a first person shooter where you didn't want to first person shoot. You're always trying to like sneak around and save your ammo so you could have some funds. And I thought about it, and I thought about, okay, yes, there are obstacles, but you don't want to like just meet everything head on and just, you know, have these giant wars all the time. You want to conserve your resources. And that was it. You know, that was those things together, the idea of like human sort of goodness in the face of disaster versus like the worst of humanity, and the idea that resources are too precious to waste on just fighting all the time gave rise to this. You know, and people really responded to it because I think there is a limited number of really exciting Euro-y themes. Like the Euro-y games tend to be kind of serious or very grounded, but I think Euro players enjoy sci-fi and post-apocalyptic themes. They don't just enjoy those mechanisms. They don't want another dice chucker. By the way, I do love Wasteland Express. I do own it, and I've played it a bunch. I think it's great, but it's not going to scratch that Euro itch. Right. It scratches a totally different itch. So I was like, hey, you like Euro games, you like Architects of the West Kingdoms or some other Euro. Here's another Euro. But you're not building medieval city, right? You are in this post-apocalyptic city of Moscow, and you're trying to survive and rebuild. And I thought that there'd be a response to it, and there was. You know, like I guessed correctly. But that was my idea why people would want to play something and not just say, well, I already own all these other great Euro games.
Right, exactly. And so for that, that's what drew us to it. I mean, yes, it has Stan's name on it. So of course we are going to be, you know, it's your game, but you know, every game does have to kind of stand on its own. And I don't want you to ever feel like you're going to ever let us down, but it's like, I don't even like these kinds of themes, generally speaking, but that's exactly what drew me to it. Plus, I don't know who's doing your artwork. I forget who's doing the art, but wow, is it good.
I really enjoyed that art, and it's actually a Russian artist, and unfortunately, like I can't even contact them now anymore because of the world events. But luckily, you know, he was able to get paid and everything before, you know, economic sanctions and everything. But he is a really nice guy. He you know, did a great work, and then the guy who did a graphic design and iconography is actually my uncle. Who lives in Israel. And I hired my own uncle to do it because he's a very, very accomplished artist in his own right. And so he doesn't do board games, so don't bother trying to contact him, everybody. He won't do it, but he did it for me because he's my uncle. And and he did a great job. He did all the iconography and he put everything together, but the illustrator created those images under his direction, right? And I agree. You know, some people didn't care for it, but it's definitely a matter of taste. I sort of envisioned that art style, and so we found the guy. You know, my uncle and I, we found the guy that could do art in that style. Just on ArtStation, he's not really like a famous board game artist, but he's an artist who does art full time, and so we knew he'd be up to the task. And that was very satisfying. You know, doing the art direction for your own game is a great, like, enjoying. It's a stressful thing, but it's also it's a lot of enjoyment in it.
Right. And I'm like you mentioned it earlier when you talked about how you just couldn't paint, you didn't have those kinds of skills. There's a difference between being talented in art expression, someone who can paint, who can take the idea from here and do this. I can't do that either. Right. But you can still be creative in art, creation, generation, or even criticism, and in the positive sense. Criticism is sometimes looked at as a bad word. It's actually a positive word. It means to critique and to be helpful and constructive. And so I think that someone can be like that. I've done that in the past as well. That's more of a personal story, but I can't draw what I'm thinking, but I can help direct an artist to be able to do that very thing and still be satisfied that the vision is still your own. So it's very interesting. And I think that would be fun, is to be part of art creation, but he did a great job. The art is great. It has that, I don't know if you've ever heard of a video game called the Valkyrie Chronicles. It has this turn-based, strategy game where you're moving your soldiers, and it has a very kind of cartoon style to it, but it has this heavy, serious overtone. It's a very interesting juxtaposition between art and the theme of the game. And I see that in Resurgence, which is what drew me to it. So yeah, and look, art is subjective. Not everybody's going to like everything that you do, but I personally found it very, very nice and very compelling. So yeah, that's great. We're excited for Resurgence. And so you, let me see here. Let me see how to ask this last question here. I'll edit this out. It's fine.
It's okay.
Let's see. Okay, here we go. So we've been talking a lot about games and your talent in terms of all these themes and all these mechanisms and how you've done that. But you're involved in a lot more than just game design. I found out through your website. You're involved in developing games. In fact, you mentioned it a little bit, helping others develop and solve problems and all of that. You just mentioned art creation, being involved in art creation or development in your own project, etc. Do you love all of these connected aspects kind of equally, or do you have a favorite thing that you've really? I know you said you'd like to. The spark of your ideas is the best part, but as far as all of these different connected aspects of the business side of it coupled with the creation side, how do you process through that? Do you have a favorite, and why?
Sure. Well, development, as I kind of mentioned, I learned to like it. At first it was just a thing that I knew I had to do it to get to the end part of designing a board game. Yeah. And it's a weird thing, the game development is game design, pretty much, or game design is game development. It's tough to separate the two, and we try to separate it so hard. But what does a game developer do? Well, you usually brought in a design that already exists, and then you're asked to kind of give it a sanity test and see, does it work? What doesn't work? You're asked to find kind of problems there, and then you're asked to fix the problems. So what do you do when you design a game? You do exact same thing. The game design part of design is only the very first part. After that, it's all development of your own game. So the thing they would say, well, this game is designed by this guy, but developed by this guy. Well, is it though? Does it mean the designer just gave him like his first sheet of paper and then the guy developed it? No, usually the developers come in at the very end or more than halfway through. Maybe. Like in my games, it's usually at the end. Like I hand in an entire game. It has beginning, middle, and end. I write the rule book. I create like the art assets from, just kind of like either Google image or whatever, just the stand-ins. So I like to give people a whole thing. I never just give somebody like lined paper with notes on it. But then, it goes to their development, a person they trust, and then they kind of do their thing. But sometimes developers are asked to come up with entire things. Like I was asked to come up with a solo mode for them. So you design in a solo mode, but you base it on existing rules. So somebody did design, so you develop it. It's a very blurred line. I think the biggest difference for me is this. Design is roughly, I would define as like new ideas and concepts that you coming up with and creating. Development is taking existing concepts, ideas, and improving them or finishing them, whatever the case may be.
Right.
And they're very hand in hand. So I think every designer is a developer. Maybe not every developer is a designer. Like I know some guys, they just troubleshoot and play test, like play test, troubleshoot. But a lot of them will come up to these points where like something doesn't exist in the game that should exist. And the designer isn't able to do it. So they do it. Right. And then, it's a different challenge. Like I said, it's you have constraints, which is great. Constraints actually breed creativity. People often think that constraints are bad for creativity, but getting constraints is good. And puzzle solving, problem solving, whatever you want to call it. It's like, hey, there's a problem, we need to solve it. So development is just scratches a different itch, but it's a much bigger part of being a game designer, even on your own designs. You're just going to do a ton of development. You sit there and you play test your own game. You are developing your own game.
Yeah. Yeah, if I were to design a game, I'd want to be involved in the development, because I think it's part of the process. It's part of your baby, I have wondered that. So I'm glad you've explained that. Maybe some other folks have had that same question. We all understand, I think, designed by, James Hudson from Druid City. He does a lot of the development, but, Tim and Ben Eisner have done a lot of designs for Druid City. Johnny Pack is another one. He's designed some games, but you see him listed on a lot of development side of things. And you sort of, like you said, you sort of want to separate them as if they're two totally different things, and the designers just kind of come up with that. I actually thought that too. I wasn't sure how it worked. So it's nice to know that most often it's a blend. Designers are developers. Developers might have to be designers at some point too and step into that role too. So I think that's pretty illuminating. That's really cool. Wow. So this was a lot. Is there anything else that you wanted to share in particular that I didn't ask you regarding all this fun stuff, or even something else about Resurgence? I know we're in late pledge territory. Do you know when that's going to end as far as late pledge for Resurgence?
It's a hard question to answer. We were going to actually end it a lot sooner. But then there were like a couple people wanted to come in, a couple people wanted to drop out. So there was just kind of like the cycling people in and out of late pledge. So there was not really a great reason to finish it. And we were afraid that if we would get too many people coming in late, we won't have enough copies. But then we ended up ordering kind of like extra, a few hundred extra. So then we're like, well, we have extras because we figured we'll always sell them in the post, like through private sales or something like that in the cons. So now I'm not so concerned about there suddenly like 100 people coming in and wanting the game. And that hasn't happened. But if it did happen, if we got like a small rush of people, we just have to close it because we don't want to not have enough copies for everyone.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because, once the print run is locked in, we know how many units we're going to get. But since we got a few extra, we're still keeping it open. But, I don't want to put an exact date on it, but obviously when the production starts, so production on the wood pieces already started, and I think it should be done soon. The production on the paper has been delayed due to the COVID closures in the area that the plants are located. But it once it like starts in a month or two, we're gonna have to close it because after that there'd be like no way to add any more copies without major expense.
Right.
So for now, folks, you can go check it out. We also have we have a Facebook group, Resurgence the Board Game Facebook group, so you can pop in there, join that to just I do Resurgence stuff, but I just do all my other things there too. I just it's like my community page, I guess you would say, for people who like my design. So if you like Rurik or Lockup or Always Impresario or Endless Winter is about to come out, whatever it is, come on over. I'm going to be talking about all those things in future projects on my page. It's like the easiest way for me to keep in touch with people who like my designs. And then like I'm open to feedback and people talking back to me on it or telling me like what their thoughts are on different games and different things. It's just part of being available to the community. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, and that's great. I'm glad that you're so accessible. And it's funny because I definitely was doing it wrong over the last, I don't think it's been a year I've been trying to track you down. It's been several months though, for sure. But I haven't really actively really pressed in. And so Facebook was the key. So that's great. One of the games I didn't even mention was Endless Winter, Paleo Americans. And I was backer 34. for that one. We went all in. Chief Pledge. Yeah. In fact, I have something to show you that I was gonna grab. Hold on, this is unscripted. I was gonna grab this before we started. I totally forgot. The folks from Fantasia sent me a set of their minis so that I could paint them, and I painted the mammoth.
Oh, you did? You painted it yourself?
I did.
That looks great.
Thanks. I did that myself, and I have the other ones over there primed and ready to go. I haven't.
Oh, wow, cool.
Time has been a thing, but no, I cannot wait for Endless Winter.
I know. I've been waiting for it too with you. You know, I don't have any like extra access to anything, which is fine, but I've played it recently on TTS for like they're doing some streams, and I was a part of one of the stream, and it was great to like revisit it. Like it's been a while, and to play with other people and kind of remember the game. But yeah, I think it's going to be a really cool in-person kind of experience for the game.
Yep. We got the play mat, we got the whole thing coming, and I just can't wait. But Fantasia did a great job with that. And that's probably, they really did. As far as a first-time campaign, that's unheard of to run a campaign. That's
what everybody wants for their first campaign, right?
That's exactly. Now they've set the bar, so now they got to keep it going, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like they have a lot of great things in the mix. They really threw themselves in head first. You know, they have Unconscious Mind being advertised, and I saw the advertising game for a different company that I think they're branching into like doing business with other companies and other projects and doing their own project. So they really dove head in, where I had like more of a slow, like I've been a designer for many years, then I started development, then I got into publishing. For me, it's been a lot more gradual. Yeah. They just kind of dove off a cliff head first, faced all these challenges, which is it's much tougher than people know.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It's a lot of risk. First of all, like financial risk, and the time you'll never get back if you fail it's not just the money you waste, it's all the opportunities that you didn't take while you were taking this opportunity. So big risk, big reward for them, I would say.
Yeah, now they have an imprint company, Pika. I think they just announced.
That's the one I was referring to, right?
Yeah, like, and they have in the game.
Yeah, I was like, I saw the announcement, and so I figured they were, Yeah. So
the game is already in the hotness list. The Flow, it's called, and I'm already looking at it. The art looks beautiful, and I'm like, all right, good.
Great.
You know, that
sounds like a very accessible kind of game.
Yep.
Which I like. You know, I try to keep mine accessible. So to me, that's a big benefit. Yeah. I would definitely be checking it out for sure when there's more available on.
Yeah, so the fact that you got hooked up with Fantasia and then developed such an amazing game, because I did play it a little bit on TTS. I limit how much pre-gaming I do.
Sure.
Even as a content creator, I won't cross certain lines because I like to be surprised when I get a game as well. And I know that goes totally against content creation. You know, content creators want to get everything ahead. They'll play prototypes. They'll do all of this. But I also am a gamer, and I'm first and foremost a gamer, really. And I really want to just be able to set up Endless Winter physically in person on the table with all the stuff and just take it all in and really dive into it. But I was able to mess around with it a little bit in TTS, and I played maybe a round or two in the game with some others that were in there. And but I didn't play the whole game, and it gave me that flavor, and I'm like, this is it's so rad. And I love the Micho's artwork. That's the other thing too. I really like his artwork. And so yeah, I didn't want to go on a bit about it, but that's a game that really for me was like, wow, Stan has his hand in some really good, like big stuff here. Yeah. And that was really cool. So yeah, awesome job on that. I can't wait for it. Hopefully it'll be, I think they're saying later this year now. I know they've hit some rocky parts.
Yeah, I think, from what I understand, I saw the production picture, so it sounds like they're producing all the pieces.
Yep.
So then it's just going to be a matter of packaging it up, getting it on the ships, and shipping is slow. But even being slow, I'm hoping by Essen, which is October, it'll be like getting shipped to people. So yeah, Q4 this year, which is Resurgence going to be Q4 this year. And before I forget, I do want to say one thing. Yeah. The end of this year, hopefully, I'm going to have another game too that's through Half a Kingdom Games, and that's all powered by Micho. So you've mentioned Micho, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I love that guy. I actually do love him a lot. I I love his artwork. I own a whole bunch of games, and then he did Shadow Kingdoms of Valeria and Endless Winter. So
Yep.
he done 2 of my games, but this one he's doing for me, as you know, I am his direct client, so I get to like communicate with him, and which is I'm expecting to have a lot of fun with that because I'm a big fan of his art. So that's going to be announced soon. So stay tuned. There's going to be another game coming out for my company once Resurgence is getting delivered to people, because I do definitely want that to come first. I want people to get what they paid for, and to see the quality and to see the gameplay in real life. And then, I'll feel comfortable when people are satisfied with that. And then I'll go ahead and launch my next project.
Well, look, and if you're welcome, or if you want to, you're welcome to come back on and do another. David Turchi said the same thing. He was like, anytime you hear me designing another game, if you want to be back on on our channel, I'd be delighted and honored.
It's a lot of fun for me to come in and talk to you. So it's not a hard sell for me. I'd be
awesome. I have one more question that's not on your sheet. It's not on your sheet.
All right, I'm ready.
Are you ready? Are you ready for this question?
I love those questions.
I'm doing this for my community, our community. They know that I'm actually in the beginning stages of the very scary process of designing my own game. And I've given some details recently. I've actually talked about this with Elijah Morar from Bedouin Games. They're currently kickstarting The Flood. If you've seen that game at all. And I spoke to him off air. I actually interviewed him about that game as well. And he's been kind of feeding me some inspiration and things about my game design. And I talked to Sam McDonald from Garfield about it. He gave me some feedback on where I was going and directions and all that. I saw on your website, and this is your fault, so I'm not putting you on the spot. This is what you do, right? What is your? I don't expect you to tell me what your fee is, but I want you to name your fee when we're off air. And help me with my game. Is that something is that what you do? Is that how you do it with people when they need?
So yep. My development workflow is people will approach me, or sometimes it's like a mutual thing where I'll see something, and then they'll say like, okay, this is the scope of the project, and this is what I need, and then I'm pretty good at knowing how long it's gonna take. So. I just usually do there's a couple of different fee structures. Some people do like hourly or something like that. I like to do it per project because it shouldn't really matter to you if I spend, extra hours on it. It takes what it takes. So I like to give like a full, I would say, okay, this project will take, I would think how long it would take, and I would say this is how much this project would cost. So it totally depends on the scope. Some things people are very minor. Like I said, I fix some things just in the process of simply evaluating the game. And I would say, if you did these things, it would probably fix your problem. And then there's really no need to involve me further. But if it's more of an involved thing where it's like repeated play testing is required because there's a problem. So like I have to play it, fix it, play it again, make sure it's fixed. Maybe like there's a different way to fix it, try a different way. And that's when it starts taking, kind of growing into a project. So it's totally doable. I have a very kind of like light approach to it. I usually always do evaluation first. And like I said, a lot of times we just during the evaluation, I'm like, I've seen this problem before. I've had this problem in my game. I just did this. Try this.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's all it is. So yeah, definitely, I'd be happy to connect with you afterwards, and you show me what you have, and I'll tell you exactly what needs to be done to get it going. I'm all about making it the best version it can be.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that I really want Micho's artwork, and it's a blacksmithing game. I'm actually an amateur blacksmith. I have a shop on our property. I have an anvil. I have a forge, and I had a mentor for a lot of time. COVID messed a lot of stuff up with that, which was really bad. We got into it right before COVID hit, my wife and I both, and I've kind of run with it, and I've made little things, and I think that I could make Euro style game that simulates this a lot better than what has been done in the board game space up until now. A lot of it is just dice chucking and things like that.
Yeah, like King's Forge.
Yes, even the Blacksmith in Merchant's Cove, which also is from Final Frontier. I love the Blacksmith. He's cool, but it's a lot of dice.
Which isn't what blacksmithing is like. It's very purposeful, skill-based occupation where the temperatures have to be right and you can't hammer too hard or too soft. It almost needs to be a dexterity game. But Euro works. It needs to have a dexterity element where you have to like.
Yeah. Well,
I'm already developing.
I know. I see it.
I'm already doing it. There you go. It's funny. I can't help it, man. I can't help it.
I know. I love it. And I'm glad we're capturing this. This is, look, folks, this was unscripted. This was totally odd. He didn't know I was going to ask him this. And I know it seems oddly self-serving, and I'm not.
It's fun.
I'm not doing that. I am not a game designer. Sure. But I have a good idea. And that's when you were talking about the explosion of ideas. I'm actually simulating the dexterity, though, in a way, because you can be burned in this game. There's risk involved. Blacksmithing is real hard. Danger. That's what it is. And so there's a little bit of a dice mechanism in the game, but it's very low. It's just a mitigation factor. Yeah. But you can actually get burned because what you're doing is you're starting off as an apprentice. So you're not the master of the shop. You're the apprentice. It's funny you mentioned dexterity because it actually does take a lot of dexterity and a lot of just perseverance. And it's a hot, sweaty, very dangerous environment. You got to be very careful. So anyway, that's kind of the idea. But no, I thought that the folks on our Discord and our fans would be happy to hear that because a lot of them have been asking, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I'm at that spot where I'm like, I don't know where to go from here. Like I'm building things and all that, but I don't know what to do. So anyway, but you offer that service. It's on your website. And so I figured
we'll talk about it. We'll get it set up for sure.
Nice. All right. Well, listen, Stan, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I'm so thankful that you were able to carve out this time for us here on the channel. I really appreciate you being here, not just as a fan. You know, Lexi and I are very big fans of yours. I'm a little starstruck. I'm still a little starstruck, but thanks for being so accessible and so real and just sharing so much of your passion with our community. I think it's something that is... I think we need to do this more. I think showcasing what designers are doing. And yes, it's competitive. We know that. But at the same time, you're all kind of in this space together and you learn from each other. And it's really neat. So anything else you want to mention before we go do our exit?
Yeah, just to say, I want to thank you too. You know, content creators are very important, doing these things, your channel does a great job. Sort of promoting the hobby, keeping a spotlight on the hobby. I'm very, thankful to be here today. I'm very happy to do this interview with you. I had a lot of fun talking to you personally, just from a personal perspective. And I'm definitely looking forward to doing this again in the future.
Awesome. All right. We'll definitely have you on again, Stan. I really appreciate it. So all the best to you and your family. Of course, we're praying for the Ukraine and all of that. And so just wanted to say thank you for all of you for being here. Again, if you like this kind of content, you want to see more of this in the future, more designers coming on, maybe your favorite designer will be able to interview. And so, make sure you like, subscribe, share this video out, post it on Facebook, post it on Twitter. We want to promote good games and good designers that really care about this hobby. And so anyway, thank you very much for coming all aboard. Take care of yourself and God bless you.